Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had a great Valentine's Day. That's when we were last here. This morning, I do not have Trevor Foote with me. I have PJ Robertson. Most of you have met PJ before on the show because she's been a guest. Is this your fourth time, PJ?
I think so, yeah.
Fourth time.
Regular.
Yay. That's right, a regular. If you remember, Trevor is at the Builder Show in Las Vegas. So she went there last year and she brought back a lot of good feedback on where the market's going and kind of new products and stuff coming through with new construction homes and even renovations. So we'll be able to talk about that the next show. But today we have PJ and I'm super excited. PJ's a good friend of mine and she's been doing real estate in Rocky Mount for...
It'll be 8 years in April.
8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she grew up here, so she has certainly seen the market shift over the years.
Yes, and most remarkably in the last 5 years, it's been kind of very interesting to watch.
Yes, and as you know, that's when I got into real estate, just 3 years ago almost. So I've not seen it ebb and flow quite as much as PJ has, or certainly Trevor has either. But one thing we were talking about last week and this week is really... When I started in 2022, the market very much felt like a seller's market. And in 2020 is when you really saw the shift of a seller's market, right?
Right. Well, I would say at the beginning of 2020, it was a little weird. I think everybody was panicked, saying, where is this going to go? And by the end of it was absolutely crazy. It was such a seller's market.
And 2021 was still crazy.
Insane. Yeah. 2022, even I'd say part of 2023, or most of 2023.
Was crazy, yes. Well, one thing we talked about is kind of the seller's market, and now last year it felt like it was a nice balance of buyer and seller, and this year it still is a nice balance, but definitely kind of shifting to more of a buyer's market, particularly when there's so much new construction on the market, as we talked about on the last show when Trevor pulled some numbers. So much new construction on the market, so the buyer really has an opportunity to push for things that are important to them, whereas the builder really had the opportunity the previous years, don't you think?
Yeah.
And then one thing we talked about was what that means for sellers and what that means for buyers to think about it as a buyer's market. So we were going to kind of talk through some of that with you. So PJ, when you say a buyer's market, what is one of the first things that comes to mind?
So one of the first things, I think, they just get their way a little bit more. So they can maybe play a little bit more on the purchase price if they don't want to pay full price.
Right.
Inspections as well. They have a little bit more negotiating room, I'd say.
So those inspections, you had commented really back in 21, 22, that sellers, they didn't really have to do anything because if this person wanted a bunch of repairs, the next person would take it as is.
Yeah, because there was such limited inventory and it was so competitive, and now we're not seeing that as much, so sellers are having to do a little bit more than they've had to do in the past 4 years.
Yeah. The other thing I see in kind of a buyer's market right now is not everyone, but a lot of you look at Zillow or Realtor.com or Trulia, and on that it gives a range for the house.
Yes.
The Zestimate. That's right. It gives a range, and then it gives that one number that Zillow think is like the estimate for this house, the Zestimate. And I see that is an important number to keep in mind as someone is pricing their home, because so many buyers are really looking at those numbers to see, are you within the range? Are you at the range? Where are you in that?
Well, and they're taking it to heart, and you might price it differently based on other comps that you have available, but the consumer's not seeing that. So it's kind of an interesting conversation.
It so is. You're so right about it, because it is now something I have a conversation with sellers about, even if I don't agree with it, which very often I don't agree with it. But it's just something you have to keep in mind.
Right.
All right, so we talked about repairs, definitely something. Something I see often these days is closing cost. So rather than necessarily just adjusting off the purchase price, In fact, the 3 I have under contract right now all have closing cost support, but we're all pretty close or on the purchase price. But, to a buyer, that is really helpful, that money to come to close with. And to the seller, it pretty much means the same thing at the end of the day.
Right. It's just the number.
It's just the number, right? So let's say the house was $300 and you wanted $10,000 in closing cost, then you would be at $290. Or you came off the price, $10,000, you'd be at $290. So it's pretty much the same, but it does impact the buyer differently. All right. One other thing we talked about, PJ, I had to look at my notes, everybody, is time during a close period. So I feel like it was a race to close at 25 or 30 days.
Yeah, see how quickly you could close.
See how quickly you could close. And the ones I have under contract right now, 2 are at 60 days.
Oh my gosh.
Yep, 2 are at
That's
60
crazy.
days. Yep, and the seller was, in both cases, was happy to accommodate the 60 days. So that has been, I think that's a really, nice perk for a buyer. Certainly the seller got closer to the number they wanted, they just had to wait a little bit longer to get to that number.
Right.
All right, so when we started talking about repairs, that led PJ and I to the conversation of inspections. Whew. I think it's so interesting how people, you can spend so much money on inspections.
Oh, it's crazy.
So much money on inspections. And while you can also save money on inspections if things are discovered that then your seller is willing to come off the price for. But in North Carolina, the seller does not have to come off the price. You are or make any repairs in North Carolina. So in North Carolina, you are essentially, as a buyer, buying that home for exactly what you see is what you get. Now, very often, we just discussed this, many times sellers do make repairs or come off, but they are not required to. All right.
Well, and another little note on that is I think they're a little more willing to work with buyers because if the property goes back on the market, everything that was in that inspection becomes a material fact that they have to disclose. So
talk through that, because I feel like that isn't something that is always easy for people to understand, because we say that this inspection report was the property of the buyer because they're who paid for it, but then it becomes a material fact about the house for anything that was discovered.
Right. So the inspection report is still the property of the buyer, but because the seller now knows of issues, those issues themselves they have to be disclosed or repaired. And if they're repaired, that's a meat issue. But
yeah, so that's North Carolina. If we as an agent, the buyer, or the seller knows of a significant material fact, defect, crack in foundation, those are the type of things that by ethics and law are supposed to be disclosed. So that's why inspections are kind of tricky.
They're a little bit bare, yeah.
So we started talking through all the different types of inspections that we have clients get. Home inspections, radon, which is a natural occurring gas, and there are some pockets around here, but most of that is more middle North Carolina. Termite, a pool inspection if there's a pool. This is where they'll look at the liner and the pump and all that kind of stuff. Well, and a well water.
Yep.
Septic. And then you pointed out a good one, surveys.
The surveys.
And often the closing attorney I see is who will say, we really need a survey because the boundary lines are unclear. But surveys are not something that I always do.
Well, and if it's like new construction, the builder
lot lines are pretty clear.
Done that. It's very clear. But if it's just kind of a weird shaped lot and you can see it from a tax card, that's always a good
indication when to get one. So the termite is one that PJ and I actually had a conversation about earlier this week, because so often, obviously we know Eastern North Carolina, we know it is humid and damp, and our crawl spaces, not on a slab, the ones that are, a true crawl space tend to get kind of yucky under there sometimes if they're not sealed. And so a termite inspection is often recommended because that can be tens of thousands of dollars to remediate. However, I did learn something. Maybe you all knew this. I didn't know this. I learned this a few weeks ago, that the building codes require that a home be treated at the point of building by the builder, regardless of the county. So I thought it was county specific of Nash County, Edgecombe County, and Franklin County, and Halifax County. Those are kind of and Wilson. So those 5 that I hear more about. But all 5 of those in our area require that. And so I don't actually know if this is a state of North Carolina or if this is an individual adoption policy. So that means a termite inspection isn't something that's necessarily required when it's new construction.
Right.
So I think it's good for about 2 years. But that's something where often, if a buyer really feels passionate about it, and that's kind of how this came to the forefront for me. I always try to learn from anything. The buyer felt very passionate about it, and the home inspector is actually who convinced the buyer that he didn't have to have this because it was a new construction. So I thought that was interesting.
That's really interesting.
Okay, for fun, after home inspections and after seller's market and buyer's market and PJ, let's talk about, we wanted to pull our highest priced property on the market for Rocky Mount and our most modest price property for the home on the market in Rocky Mount. So these are specifically Nash County, Rocky Mount address, Nash County, Rocky Mount address. So we're going to look at the most modest priced one, and this is actually on Burton Street. We have a few pictures for you. And PJ, don't tell them yet, but we wanted to kind of talk through the price of this. So this is listed, actually not by our firm, this is listed by Mike Allen with Boone Hill Allen and Ricks. So you can see it's a 1-bedroom ranch, has little opportunity for improvement inside, but it looks pretty clean. It's a little bit dated, but still pretty clean on the inside. That paneling back from years gone by. I know, I do too. All right, PJ, what do you think is priced?
Oh shoot, I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to go around 100.
Close, yes, very good. It's priced just at 90, so 89,900. And right, like I said, this was Mike Allen's property, but so Burton Street, you've sold a lot on Burton Street. I feel like that is.
I've sold a few, yeah.
Because we did one together on Burton Street. There are 3 on the market on Burton Street. This is the most modestly priced of those 3. And like I said, this was the most modest priced home in Rocky Mount in Nash County at the moment. All right, now we want to show you the other end of the spectrum. So this is the highest price. Check that out. So this is over on the reservoir. Look, it has a pool. I think it's
on the water.
On the water.
With a dock.
With a dock, that long private driveway. I want to say it's about 7 acres. This is listed by Jen Dwyer with WPI. I mean, the kitchen is large and expansive. Might need a few updates based on today's, speaking of the builder show, building standards, but it is very pretty nonetheless. Large master right here. So there's the outside. PJ, what do you think this one is?
Oh, this one's tricky. I'm going to guess over $1 million because of the land.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So this one is just under 1.5. So 1.47, 1,470,000 for this one. So we just saw $90,000 or just under 90,000 and 1.5 million. And it really depends on, where you are and how much space. But it's really interesting because I feel like there's almost something for everyone. You can, somebody with a large pocketbook could be here happy, and somebody who is ready to put in some sweat equity could also be very happy.
Well, and it just shows the affordability of this area, which is really wonderful.
Because that house at 1.5 would probably be 4.5 if it was in Wake County.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah. PJ, thanks so much for being here
Well,
today.
thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah, and thank you all. And obviously, as you think of any other topics you'd like to hear more about, PJ or I or Trevor would love to share them with you. So thanks so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a great one.